this webinar for us. And I've had an opportunity to talk to our representative Onawa, and she talked to Dr. Richard Capone to lay out what our goals of this webinar are. And I did send that out to administrators to share with teachers ahead of time. So specifically, most of you have had an opportunity to at least administer the DORA assessment once in this during the fall, and some of you are actually getting ready to do a second assessment now. So we want to specifically today to look at some of the pieces that you can look at to show what data you have, and then for you to use that data to inform instruction for your students going forward. And so some of the pieces that we'll look at today will be looking at the class profile and how you can group students, or how the profile groups students for you for guided reading. We'll also look at a description of the types of readers that you may have, and some possible strategies that you can use with those readers. We're hoping that we'll have time today to look at the student gain chart. And the student gain chart will only be appropriate for those students who have done more than one assessment. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to look at that, because for us, we're not so much concerned about what grade level the student is at. I always make a kind of a joke that you know, sometimes we arrive at these grade level equivalencies and reading levels, you know, by taking the student's age, multiplying by their mother's shoe size, dividing by their birth date, you know, and we have all these formulas for doing it. But what we're looking at in Northern Lights School Division is, are your students growing and progressing, and are you putting strategies in place and working with the student so that they're showing adequate growth in their reading ability? Also, we're hoping to have time to look at the comprehension subtest, and Richard will certainly explain the importance of that. The other piece is the fluency test, and we really haven't looked at that a whole lot, but some of you have been asking, what can I do with those students who are raising some red flags in reading comprehension? And we know that a student's fluency in reading is a definite predictor of their ability to comprehend what they read. And so Richard will show you how to set up a fluency test for those students who you feel that may be necessary for. Today, Richard is actually going to use live data from one of our schools, and we specifically want to do that so that you'll see that it's relevant data, it's authentic data, and to be transparent about what we're doing. And just a reminder to you that the data that you see is for training purposes only, and it's not for comparison of students or one school to another school or for any future discussions. So our purpose for DORA, as I said, is to improve your instructional practices, to have you to getting to know your students better so that you can be very specific in the strategies that you use for each student, and you can differentiate as necessary. And so Richard's going to help us along that journey today by revealing some of the data to us a little deeper. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Richard Capone to continue with the webinar.
All right, thank you very much. And okay, so I actually have only about 3 slides to show you, and then I'm going to jump into an account with some data. But I like to just quickly reiterate. Now, I know most of you have seen this probably in one training or another, but just to sort of remind everyone that a standards model is looking at only one grade level at a time, really. You find out whether a student's at, above, or below. But remember, DORA is built on a diagnostic model. And so one thing that people sometimes forget is that when we go through each of the subtests of reading, we actually adapt up and down until we find instructional points. So even if somebody's older, we may still test them in high-frequency words, and if they don't have mastery at the highest level, we may adapt downward to find an instructional point. And I think this is really important to remember, and that's why we can actually use our scores and look at them across different years. So if you suddenly are a 5th grade teacher and you see your student has scores from earlier years, you'll be able to use all that data and compare it, because it's one continuous scale. And it's also really important to realize that What we're going to be talking about today is each of these subtests a little bit and making sure you understand the nature of each measure. As Karen mentioned, the thing about test scores is that they're not exactly each student. Each student is unique, and scores will have biases. And so part of the goal today, too, is to give you a little bit more insight into the scores and so that you could better interpret them. All right? So let me go ahead and jump into an account right now. And I'm logged into a teacher account, which I just sort of grabbed randomly. And right now I'm going to jump into the DORA page. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Before I begin, the first thing I want to mention is that if you go to the Home tab, everyone should really make sure that they use the test admin scripts when you're administering the assessment. I know sometimes it gets easy to be a little lax and say, okay, I'm just going to have the students take the test. But the admin script right here, if you click on DORA, it sort of reminds you of how to position this and proctor it to the students, making sure that they know that this is something they need to work hard at, because this is going to be information that helps you, the teacher, help them. And also the other thing too, it does remind you that students should have an activity to do when they're done. Because it's an adaptive assessment, some students will finish earlier. It's not necessarily mean they're better students or they're weaker in reading, it just varies. Sometimes students are more advanced and they keep going further and further in the comprehension. Sometimes, it's the opposite. So make sure students know that they should be quiet, they can transition into their activity so they don't disturb the other students, because otherwise everyone starts getting antsy. The student feels like, oh, half the class is done and I'm still going. And so then they rush through the assessment. Okay, and again, that can be found right here on the Home tab over Test Admin Scripts right here for DORA. Okay, I will go ahead now, jump into the DORA page. And Karen, you could also keep your eye out on the nav bar. If you see a burning question come up, then we could answer it. But otherwise, we could take questions in the end. Okay, so right now I'm looking at my class, and one of the first things I want to show you is that we see all of these different scores. And most of you have probably already looked at this. If you're not quite sure what something is, you can roll your mouse over the question mark, and you could click on it, and we can see this is phonics, and we see the grade range, and we can see what each score represents. So a 2.5, for instance, represents a student who's mastered long vowel, and they're probably next going to work on consonant digraphs, vowel digraphs, and so on and so forth. I could also go ahead from here, sort. If I click on these little triangles, high to low to high. Oops, doing it for phonics here. So these students have a lower score, and then I sort it from high to low. But the downside about looking at all these scores here is that it's sort of a lot of scores to try to create groups, right? So if I know I'm specifically working on phonics, then I could see that these students right here all have a maximum score in phonics. And then the other students lower down maybe need to work a little bit on phonics, and these two students right down here need to work on beginning sounds. But if I really want to look at my class and create a group, what I would be using is a display class profile. Okay? So I click on this button, and now what that does is it really takes the decoding scores and puts them into a decoding category, and then vocabulary into one, and comprehension. So now we're looking at student by profile. So we say a student who is low in decoding, low in vocabulary, low in comprehension would be in the A group. These students here in C, these are the students who are good in decoding, good in vocabulary, but maybe a little low in comprehension. So that would be another group that you would focus on, right? So this is really a nice way to create these groups very quickly. And if I click on the letter, let's say we want to take a look at the C students, I can now see these are the students in that group, and we see that there's even a little description. Upper elementary students in this group have good word recognition, phonics, and vocabulary skills, but struggle to make meaning from text. Students with this kind of profile often see reading as decontextualized process involving sounding out words. So again, we have a nice little summary of this kind of group to sort of get you situated, or even if you wanted to copy this text and send it to a parent. It's sort of a nice little paragraph there that sums up something, or somebody, or even a tutor. It sort of gives people some kind of bearing about this kind of profile. Now right here we see, here's all the students listed, and we see that they all have very strong decoding. The vocabulary was on grade level or above, and then the comprehension is what was low. So I'll hit the back button. Again, we see some other groups here too. We have H. Those are the students who are on grade level or above in all three categories. And I can click on those too. So if I want to click on my H students. Okay, and we see those students right there too. Now, don't forget, I mean, even though I'm clicking on this, the profiles, we can still have access to the students' individual reports. And so let me go ahead and click on one of the students' summary reports. I want to show you, let's take a look at the student right here. Now I have the option of viewing it with scores or without scores. And sometimes if you're sharing a report with a parent, it's nice to not have scores because then it just becomes a simpler conversation. You don't have to describe all the numbers. You're just saying, hey, this student is strong here, maybe a little weaker here. But I'll go ahead and show the one with scores. Now be aware that right here we see the grade. The student took the assessment on January 10th. They're at 5.4, so we do a decimal grade. So 5th grade, 4th month. And we see this particular student is low in high frequency words, low in word rec, and low in phonics. And we see this, that means within decoding, there's 3 different areas that they're low. And we can see their scores over here on the right. Now the student is stronger in oral vocabulary, which is great. That's why you have a green checkbox. But again, this gives you sort of a real quick snapshot of seeing, you know, what areas do we need to prioritize and focus on. And down below we have the graph. Now what's interesting is for some of these students, just be aware, I do see that their phonemic awareness is high. That's actually a good sign. What it tells me is that even though the student may have lower phonics, I know it's not an auditory processing issue. By the way, in order to get a high phonemic awareness score, it's hard to get a false high score in our assessment. So that means that student was able to hear problems like, what's the middle sound in the word cat? Ah. And they were able to figure that out. So I know that they can actually understand the instructions and hear and pull apart phonemic awareness sounds. So that's good. Okay, so the other piece here is that we have lots of reports. All the reports are on the right. But if you also want to take a look at a student over time, so let's say somebody has taken multiple assessments, and if we look at any of these students here, let's take a look at Carter. Here's a student who has some pretty high scores, and once we see this little arrow here, it basically tells us that there are previous tests. So I'm going to click on this right here. And now we see, okay, the assessment was taken in September, and another one was done in January, and we see the score. So over time, you're going to see more and more and more scores. It's going to go down. If I wanted to actually graph these, I could check the boxes and say Display Gains Chart. And now this is graphing it for the individual student. And so this is a great one. This is a great one to go ahead and provide for you know, if you want to print this out for a meeting or you want to share it for a discussion. And so anyway, this is like you can do this for any student and you can print as many bars as you want. So let me go ahead and hit the back button here. Okay, so the other piece is, let's take a look at the teacher report as well. So if we grab a teacher report, I could go ahead and grab teacher report. Now this is going to have a little bit more information, so it goes into more depth. And I can either display a short report or a full report. I'll go ahead and do the short report. Now when you do open up, this is a PDF, you do be aware that you want to check and make sure there's no error that shows up on the front. If an error shows up, that means it hasn't been loaded properly. It does need to use the full Acrobat reader in order to be viewed properly. And so if I come to this page right here, page 3, this is sort of your standard page where we looked at before, what you saw in the summary report. But as we go to other pages, we start seeing more information. So this starts talking about how the student is decoding their graphophonics ability, how they're making meaning from text, and how they're using all their combined strategies to read. And so this is a great report if you need more information. It gives you some examples of what to do in terms of recommendations for decoding, recommendations for making meaning from text. Okay. But this is something you could take a look at your leisure, but it does give you a lot more information. Okay, the other piece I want to show you too before we start opening up some questions is also the fluency test. And so I know one of the questions is, when would I necessarily give a fluency test? And so let's say I have some students, and just remember, this is, like Karen mentioned, a student is not equal to a single test score. So if you have a student and you say, well, this doesn't make sense, Hannah, you know, I really feel like their comprehension score is sort of low. It should be higher. Sometimes at that point you may say, I want to see how the student actually is reading, and it gives you a little bit more insight. So right here we see that she's low, second grade. I might start with the fluency test around second grade. So I would go to the home page, and we have some fluency tests right here. And what I could do is I would grab, maybe I want to do the oral reading fluency with comprehension questions. So that's the one I'd want to use, either form A, B, or C. So if I would go ahead and take level 2, I'm also going to get the passage as well. So this is for the student. And they're both PDF files. And so this is what you'd print out for the student. The student would read, you give this to the student, they would read this, and then you would follow along with this document right here, where you can go ahead and mark for miscues. And you would basically have the student read the whole passage, and you would time it. And then you would mark down the number of miscues, and right down here too, it tells you exactly how to do the calculation. 220 minus miscues divided by time multiplied by 60. So you don't have to worry about getting any math incorrect there. Right there, it shows you exactly how to do it and how to calculate your percent correct. And then on this document too, we also have the questions as well. You have questions right here are the comprehension questions you would ask the student after they finish reading it. Okay. So this part is pretty simple. The fluency test is a very easy thing to administer. There's a little chart right here too to show you how to look at the scores to know whether they're on grade level or not. But mainly, you have all the different levels right here, and then you also have the levels for the students too. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see if we can open this up to some questions. And does anyone want to raise your hand, or you want to? We could also allow you to talk as well. We can unmute you. All right, so I don't see any questions yet. I'll tell you what, maybe some people don't know how to operate it. Let me go ahead and just try to unmute all for a second. Hopefully it won't get too loud. All right, I guess I better mute it back. Sorry. Is there any questions? Does anyone want to type anything into the chat box as well? Karen, do you know if did you have any questions from people maybe sent you ahead of time? Karen, are you still there? Karen.
To ask their questions.
Hi, Karen. I just unmuted you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. Oh, I see one hand up. Petronella? So I went ahead and unmuted you. You can talk. Okay, here we go. Okay, as far as getting the reading level for the fluency test, so let me go ahead and show you that. So when you are on the Home tab, over here on the fluency test, or actually, let me back up real quickly here. So there's two ways. What I would do is when you have a student who's tested, what you want to do is go ahead and look at their comprehension score, right? So this is the comprehension subtest. So if a student, and you want to do a fluency test, you would look at this comprehension score and say, okay, this student here has a 5th grade score. So what I would do is I would start off with the fluency test at the 5th grade. So really based on their comprehension score. And then from over there, then once this is where I would grab the fluency test. So 5th grade, and this would be the 5th grade form I would use. This is the 5th grade passage for the student. This is the 5th grade fluency test plus comprehension questions, the teacher guide. And this is if you didn't want to ask comprehension questions, you only want to do a reading rate. And this is the same form, but it doesn't have the questions in it. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so I'll tell you what, there's a couple other things. I sort of wanted to address some of the basic questions first, but there's one other thing I do want to dive into that I think is really important to understand when you're looking at these scores. And this is something that that especially happens with older students. And then I'll tell you what, if more questions come up, we'll go ahead and we'll answer those. But DORA is a multiple measure assessment, right? So one thing to be aware is that we've written this in such a way to give you more information about a student. But sometimes what you'll find out is that you want to really isolate skills in an assessment. So just be aware the comprehension passages in DORA are written so that they do not have high vocabulary embedded in the passages. So that means that if you have students who are older, or not necessarily older, but let's say you have students who have high comprehension but they have lower vocabulary, in our assessment we can actually tease that apart. So I'll give you an example. If you have a student who has a 5th grade comprehension in our assessment, but then they end up having 2nd grade vocabulary, if they were to take a regular benchmark test or some other 5th grade material, they may have a hard time having a score at the 5th grade. But because we don't bias them for high vocabulary in our passages, that's something to be aware of. So if you have EL students or students with low socioeconomic, sometimes you'll see that those students may have a lower vocabulary, but the comprehension score is higher than you expect. So just something to be aware of. Because we're a diagnostic and we're working with multiple measures, this is something that was important to us. And if we look at this display class profile, those are the students in the G category, right? So if we take a look at the students in G, strong decoding, strong comprehension, but low vocabulary. Let's take a look at that student. There's 2 students in this category right now. This technically, a lot of the time, students with these kind of profile, they may have a hard time reading on grade level material, but because their vocabulary brings them down so much. But in our assessment, we actually are isolating their comprehension strategy skills. And in a sense, this isn't really a reading issue. This is a vocabulary issue. So students like this, as they start going into 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, we see this growing a larger and larger subgroup. So elementary, this is how it looks like. But as you go into middle school, a lot of times the number of students that are in the G category go up. And in high school, G becomes one of the biggest intervention categories as well as C. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, but I think that's something that's really important to notice. Okay, we have another question. Does a fluency test go past grade 6? So actually, no. The fluency test, right now, our fluency test only goes up through grade 6. And part of that is because, you know, after grade 6, we're not necessarily trying to see students read faster. It's really, speed isn't really an issue anymore. At that point, it really becomes comprehension. And so what we're trying to see with students at the lower grades is that, how are they reading, trying to get more information as we're watching them read, watching the process. Okay. Okay, are there more questions? Okay, doesn't look like there are any more. Okay, here's one. Let me go to this question panel here. Okay, that's that was an old question. All right, let's see. I guess one other piece that I don't want to end it yet. Maybe you guys are being bashful, but let's go a little bit back to another student and take a look at a summary report here. Or actually, let's take a look at a parent report. If we take a look at the parent report new, we can also tell it to include recommended activities. And I'm going to look at this one with scores. So this report is another one that actually tries to profile the student without using a lot of jargon. So how Carter reads words, solid sight words, word recognition phonics, great base of letters, blah, blah, blah. Continue to use these strengths when encountering tricky words. How Carter understands words, and then finally how Carter puts it all together to make meaning. Right, so this student actually is above grade level, so it's probably not quite as revealing. But just be aware, this is another report that really tries to put everything into really simple words. And then, of course, we have that profile that we looked at before. Remember, in the profile, this is that same text. So if you don't want to have to dig this out, if you view the parent report, we actually copy this this profile for this type of student into the parent report. And then down below here, we also have activities that you can do at home for reading words and making meaning from text. Okay, so this is a really, like I said again, even though you may not be giving reports always to parents, this is a really great report to grab text. Maybe you needed to do a write-up for a student, or maybe you needed to talk to another colleague about a student. And so go to the parent report right here. Let's take a look at this student, and then we can actually see, the goals for this student, some bulleted points, and so on and so forth. There's lots of information. Oh, and I do realize there's one thing I forgot to cover that Karen wanted me to go over. Let's say we are looking at these students and we're wondering, is this score valid? This score seems sort of low for Hannah, right, for second grade comprehension. So what I could do is I can go into reporting, teacher, and we have something called the DORA Comprehension Subtest Analysis Report. So this is a very good report. This allows us to look and see how much time the student has actually taken to read the passages. So I'm going to actually put in a date range, because I want to look at the second date range, because I think these students have tested it a couple times. And so I'm going to go ahead and display. So let me see here. Oops. Oh, I see, I put the wrong date, wrong year. Okay, sorry, I'm having a little error here. Hold on a second. Let me try this again. Okay, there I got it. Okay, so we're looking at our class right now, and we see we're looking at Hannah before, and she had a 2.17 comprehension score. And so let's go ahead and take a look at her. So if we look at second grade level, she read a second grade passage and spent 1.15 minutes reading that. and then about 11 seconds per question, 11 seconds on average per question answering it, and she got 70% correct. The next level up, level 3, she spent almost 2 minutes and then 18 seconds, and she got 50% correct. And then at the 4th grade level, she spent 2.5 minutes, 19 seconds per question, 50% correct. So this is, it's interesting. I would say that it looks like she did try, and so this is probably a valid score. She probably genuinely is low. She's a student in that C category that needs to, looks at reading decontextualized. But this is probably also a little bit low. You know, so maybe you look at some of the other students here, we see 2.5 minutes. You know, maybe, so this could be well, actually, she's right on the borderline. But one of the things to really notice is you look at the other students at the same grade level, and you start seeing how much time they're spending reading. Now, here's a student here who spent less than half a minute, 8 seconds per question, and got 20%. And same thing right here. So a couple things could have happened. Either the passage was so hard, the student got very frustrated and didn't try, right? Or the student is just not trying, and this is just an artificially low score for this one student, 1.83. Now, in the 1st grade passage, it's really easy passage. He got 100%. But in the 2nd grade passage, he didn't really spend much time right here, only half a minute. So I would argue it's possible the student didn't try. But again, this is a great report because you can actually go in there and look and see how much time students are spending on reading and how much time they're spending answering questions. Okay. Now, part of it, too, which is interesting, when students take the test a 2nd time or a 3rd time or a 4th time, it looks at their previous scores. And if they're high, it actually starts them at a higher level. So this student here only did a 6th grade and then a 7th grade passage. Oh, actually, they kept jumping up higher and higher. Take that back. But anyway, part of it is that probably students have taken the test before, they come up with a high score, so then when they take the test again, it actually is going to be a little bit shorter because we can make a better guess at where their scores are at. So we can actually come in there and more appropriately select the right level for the different subtests. Okay? Again, this is a really powerful report, and let me show this to you one more time because I know people always say, oh, how did you get to that report? I went to reporting, I go to teacher, and then I come here to DORA comprehension subtest analysis report. Okay, so comprehension, which is a subtest, analysis, and I choose that. And that's how I get to that report. Okay, I see some questions popping up, so this is good. Okay, so the question is, do you have a recommendation for how long I should take to read each of the passages? And we don't have, actually that's a good idea. We should probably get something for you on that. So let me go ahead and see if we have something in one of our knowledge-based questions on that, and we'll forward that to Karen or forward to you. But generally speaking, what I like doing is, you know, the passages do get longer. Be aware, our 2nd grade passage is longer than the 1st grade passage. Our 3rd grade passage is longer than the 2nd grade. So we have a formula we follow, and we make the passages get a little bit longer each time we go up in level. And part of that is because, you know, again, we wrote DORA to really be an assessment to predict how well students will do in content classes. So that's why it's nonfiction. That's why the passages get a little longer, and that's why we don't allow look back, because we want to know how would they do if they were assigned a 5th grade science text and they have to read, you know, 4 chapters. But with that said, time-wise, it's going to go up. But I just like looking at the other students in my class when I look at this. So I would look at the students in 3rd grade and sort of see, okay, what does it look like? And you sort of just say, okay, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Ooh, half a minute, 2 minute. So I can really, real quickly, it jumps out. This student's too low. This student here is not taking enough time. Okay. Okay, so another question is, can a DORA be administered in different sections, like just do the comprehension, then work on other parts later? The reason why we don't allow that right now is that we actually use the decoding sections to determine the starting point for comprehension. So if a student is struggling in decoding, let's say they're an older student and they're struggling decoding, we're going to start them off at a lower comprehension test. And so that's why we don't do it. Now, this is what you can do. If you are testing students and you're breaking it up over 2 testing sessions, they can stop anytime they want. So you don't have to make the students finish the test the whole way in one sitting. You could do 30 minutes of testing, and then you could stop, and then you have the students come back. Or if you see a student is frustrated, you could have the student stop, and then you could have them finish after a little break the next day. So anytime you're in an assessment, if you hit the stop button, you close the browser, you quit, the machine crashes, whatever, it doesn't matter. When you log back in, it'll pick up exactly where you left off. Okay, okay, so there's some good questions. Now, the only other thing that on this page I don't see right here is that if a score shows up in red, one of the questions, that means that we suspect they guessed. And so really what happens is if somebody has an average question time of 5 seconds or less per question, they probably guessed, because you can't read a question and 4 answers in less than 5 seconds. Maybe if it was a first grade question, but of course it's the average across all 6 questions. So generally speaking, if you see something that's in red, that means that we suspect it might be potentially a guess. Okay. All right, so we have another question. Okay, so this is a good question. So let me go back to my assessment page. And if we go inside of a profile, within a specific profile, one of the questions is, why is there such a large variance within the group, right? So let's take a look at the students in C. So right here, let's go ahead and I'm going to use my pen here. What we're saying for this group is that we're really looking at or above grade level. So we're saying in this particular group, these students, by their decoding, they're at or above. Okay, so they're at or above. Within vocabulary, turns out all these students amazingly have the exact same score. Okay, so they're good. But now look at this. We see quite a bit of variance. But what's happening is they're all over a year below, because within grade is plus or minus a year. So everyone is below 4th grade or more, and we see these scores are low. So on one level, yes, there's a big variance because this is a 1.5 and this is a 3. But the other level, they sort of are the same profile. And I guess what you could almost do yourself is you're right. If you want to break this up into more groups, you could sort the students. Let me erase this here. You could continue to sort it right there. Maybe these 3 students work together, and these 5 students or 4 students are another group. So maybe you slice it even more once you're in this group. Okay, but for the most part, when you're dealing with trying to break students into groups, you sort of have to make some assumptions, and there sometimes will be some inaccuracies, right? Because, for instance, when we create these decoding groups, we're assuming decoding is one score, right? Let's take a look at the students who are low in decoding, the B students, right? So if we look at this, they're all in the low decoding group, low decoding, low comprehension, but this is actually a very different group. This student is low in sight words and phonics, right, and word rec, all 3. This student here has almost mastered phonics and is just a little bit low. So in a sense, you could argue that these students are very different, and they are, but overall, we know these students need to work on decoding. And so, like again, the problem is that we sort of have to make roll up scores and make some assumptions in order to get them in these nice groups, but you may at points want to tweak it yourself. And so that's why we want to teach you to look at these numbers and understand what it means. Okay. All right, let me go back. Okay, these are great questions. Any more questions? Hopefully you all feel more comfortable being able to look at the data. And let me show you another another video we have. If you come here to Professional Development Center, we actually have a video interpreting data. And right here, I actually recommend you watch this. In this video, we go through and explain every single subtest. High frequency words, word rec, phonics, spelling, vocabulary, and comprehension. And we really go over the biases of everything. And that's really helpful to look at. We sent you the little, I think there's a cheat sheet we sent you that talked about the biases of the subtest. But I think sometimes it's good to take more time and go through that. I know we didn't have time to go through that today because that alone takes about an hour. But anyway, that's something else that will give you some more insight into how to read these scores. I feel like a lot of times, when you look at student scores like this, you really have to sort of decipher what they mean because, again, students aren't numbers. Students are organic beings. And so we need to be able to interpret these scores, and hopefully that video plus what you learned today will help you do that. Okay. Okay, I don't see any other questions popping up. Karen, do you have anything else you want me to cover or add?
No, I think you've gone through most of the goals that we had for the webinar, and our thought today was that you would go through this, and then there may be time at the end, once we ended the webinar, that teachers could then right away go into their own data set here and maybe look at some of the pieces or review some of the things that you showed during the webinar, so it would have relevance to them respective to their own students. So, we certainly don't have to extend the webinar because we would love teachers to have an opportunity to have some discussions at their own sites and to probably have another look at their own data.
All right, that sounds super. And then if you want to, like I said, later on, if we need any kind of follow-up, we're happy to just let us know. I think definitely sometimes what's great too is as a group we look at students together. That's another fun exercise is if we have a teacher, we pick a teacher, and we look at your class, and we look at students together and analyze it. That's a nice exercise as well.
And I think Richard, you raised some really good points there about reading being a complex task and how one aspect of reading certainly does impact the other, and that's why we do the whole assessment together at one time. But I think maybe just before we close, if you could kind of reiterate that the point about the timing, the time frame that you use to do the assessment, and I think that's something we'll become more efficient with as time goes on, but maybe using the test script to show what the approximate time should be to do the assessment.
Okay, yeah, sure. So as far as the assessment, I mean, for DORA, we say it'll take about 45 minutes to 60 minutes for most students, okay, probably for 90% of the students. If the students are very, very young, like K1, 2, then it may take a little bit less time, like 30 minutes. But you're always going to have some of those students, even at grade 2, who are advanced, and then they start going higher and higher and higher if it's the first time they've taken the test. So the general rule of thumb is 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Again, with DORA, it's good to explain to students again, hey, this is something, just do your best. If you come to a question and you really can't figure out, it's okay to make a guess. Especially like when it comes to vocabulary, students sometimes don't know pictures and they don't know certain items. And so we don't want to make sure that students don't get overly frustrated. You always have some students who are very tenacious and they want to try to figure out everything. And of course, this applies a little bit more to math, right? Math is one of those things where you definitely have to make sure you cut it off for kids. But reading is a little easier. In general, students know that if they don't know a vocabulary word, then they make their best guess. But that's good to be explicit and explain it. If you wanted to give your students a little bit of a heads up, if you go to the Home tab right here and you scroll down to the bottom, this link right here allows you to open up a window to show your students the interface. So let me click on it. So this is a demo, and literally it's one question. You can't hear it. It happened to my audio, but you hear the. So this gives you one question per subtest.
Bear.
Okay, and so
Nap.
again, this is something that I don't know if everyone knows about it, and the word audio just now played grass, and then the student has to choose it. But this is a great little link on the Home tab at the very bottom. DORA, Adam has all of our assessments, and you can click on it and show them the interface. Now, the one thing I would say for reading is that, I'm going to skip all the way down to the very last one. Sorry.
Super work. This story.
It's good to explain to students that they have to read the passage, and once they're done,
Number 1.
Then the questions come up and they can't go back.
A.
Okay.
Don't like animals.
So that is something that's good to point out, is that you know, we do allow them to read the story first. They can reread the story, but when they hit the done button, they have to answer the questions and they can't go back. Okay. All right, Karen, I guess that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Richard. And for us, we're doing this as a diagnostic assessment, so our teachers can use the information to inform instruction and where they're going with students. So just a note to our NLSD teachers who are part of the webinar that, you know, we know that your next steps in planning the instruction and knowing where to go with students, that there may be times that you have questions and you're not really sure what is the best strategies to use with a student, and you may want to have an elbow partner to sit down with you and kind of look at some of the data and say, you know, what are some things I can do? What might I do with this instructional group or this guided reading group? And so our lead teachers are available to help you in that capacity, and please feel free to ask for any elbow partners you need in order to do that. And we're on a journey here together, and for sure there's more growth that we all need, and we'll work through it together. So thank you to you, Richard, for doing the webinar with us today. And Richard will be back again next Tuesday to do the ADAM webinar for those teachers who have used the ADAM assessment. And so I guess we'll talk to you again then, Richard.
Sounds good. And I'll also send you a couple email, hopefully with some other information I mentioned I sent to you, and then also with a recording link as well.
And I will send out the tip cheat sheet to our principals at the end of the webinar, and they can forward it to their teachers as necessary.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.